Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Brent Hammetner. I'm the Director of Marketing at Upswing Student Success and Retention. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome everyone to our Tips for Success for Adult Learners and Online Students webinar. This is our first time hosting a webinar on this topic, but it is an important one for a couple reasons. First, the adult learner cohort is growing fast. Today, about 4 in 10 college students are over the age of 25. Secondly, adult education has been shown to improve many aspects of society. For example, a mother's reading skill is the greatest determinant of her children's future academic success. Also, 43% of adults at the lowest levels of literacy live in poverty compared to about 4% of those at the highest. So we know that adult education is important. The next step is to better understand how to engage these students in order to ensure they're able to persist and ultimately graduate. And so that's what today's conversation will center. Before introducing the panelists, I did have a couple housekeeping items to cover. First, today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent out afterwards for your review. Secondly, at any point during today's conversation, we'd like to invite the attendees to submit their questions and comments in the bottom of the screen, and I'll show it right here. Simply click on it and type your question. You can send it anonymously if you'd like, and we'll either incorporate it in real time or wait until our QA portion of the webinar after the discussion. Right now, we're scheduled for about 30 minutes with about 15 for the actual webinar, and then about 15 minutes for a Q&A section, depending upon the number of questions. Finally, in the past, we have experienced an echo that disrupted the conversation. So to prevent that from happening again, remind the panelists to mute their microphones until they speak. And speaking of panelists, we are joined by 3 today. The first one is Tanisha Littlejohn. Tanisha is a writer and tutor who's been a member of the Upswing team since 2014. She studied literature and English at the University of the West Indies and tutors in the areas of English language and literature. As an educator, she is focused on improving students' writing and reading skills. For more than 15 years, she has worked for numerous web-based companies, providing both web and blog content. Tanisha also co-owns a gift shop with her husband and is an avid DIYer. So thanks for joining us today, Tanisha. Next, we have Tracia Agard. Tracia has been an Upswing coach since October of 2015, having clocked in over 100 hours while maintaining a 5-star rating. From a personal perspective, Tracia understands what it's like being an adult commuter student since she did both of her degrees while in her 30s. She has a master's degree in counseling in educational settings with a specialization in student affairs in higher education at Rowan University in New Jersey, and has over 10 years experience working in college settings, including working as an academic coach and as a program officer in student services at the University of West Indies, Cave Hill. So thanks for joining us, Tracia. Next, we have our next panelist is Peggy Anderson. Peggy has been a 5-star Upswing tutor for less than a year, but is a college professor with over 10 years experience tutoring college students in the areas of biology, anatomy and physiology, and nutrition. She received her master's in biology from the University of Maryland College Park as an online learner. So again, thank everybody for joining us on the webinar. I guess we can go ahead and dive right in. The first topic that we had, is talking a little bit about some of the challenges that adult learners face. So I guess we can start it off with Tanisha. I'd love to hear a little bit about, based on your experience in tutoring, different adult learners, what are some of the challenges that you've seen in being able to engage them?
Okay, thanks, Brent. One of the biggest challenges that I've noticed is the platform. I think the platform has changed over the years, whereas the tradition, a couple of years ago, most adult learners would go back into a classroom. Now they have a number of options. They find it a bit difficult to transition from something that they're used to, which is the classroom, the traditional classroom, to the online platform. The other thing is actually something that has to do with the adult learner themselves, meaning that they are usually self-doubters. They tend to doubt themselves. Most of my session starts with the adult learners explaining that they've been out of the education system for like a while. So they think that they would have a big challenge. But at the end of most sessions, I realized that most actually remember all of what they have learned previously, but they tend to doubt themselves. So it keeps them back a bit. So those are two things I think are the biggest challenges, the changing platform that they have to adjust to, plus the personal their personal beliefs in how well they will manage getting back into the classroom.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that makes sense. And I'd love to hear and jump to Peggy now. Tanisha had mentioned that the adult learners doubting themselves, and then also the platform changing over time. Have you experienced in your time, some of these same challenges, or have there been different challenges that you've seen from adult learners since yourself as an online adult learner? Maybe even speaking from a personal experience, were these something that you went through?
I would definitely agree with Tanisha that there is a lot of self-doubt, and they're very self-conscious about the age gap if they are in the classroom with traditional students. They are using technology. They're on their phone as much as the younger people, but they are not as tech savvy. So they do face challenges when you want them to do some activities or even accomplish their learning on an online platform as an online learner. Sometimes with Upswing, the tutoring just involves helping them to navigate some technical problem that they're having more than just subject matter. And I think that there really are a lot more things in common than we might think sometimes with the generation that is now coming up, we call Gen Z. They both are going to really be focused on how the learning is going to help them in their job. How are they learning job skills? They're both concerned about money. And one of the biggest challenges that the non-traditional, I teach college, so they're all adults really, but the non-traditional learner is really facing a challenge with time constraints, because whereas many of the younger people work, all of the older people normally, all of the older people do have to work, plus they have other responsibilities. They have children, so this 24/7 idea of tutoring is so valuable because they have to get the children fed and to bed before they can start their studies.
Interesting. And Tracia, I guess I'd be interested to hear with that that 24/7 I guess component in there, to where a non-traditional adult learner has to feed their kids and do a lot of other things in their home life before they can get to the work. Is that something that you've heard from during your tutoring sessions and in some of the conversations that you've had as well with some of the students that you've tutored?
Yes, that was actually one of the things I was thinking of mentioning. I think is one of the key challenges with the mature student, because that person has to juggle work. The person has to work, and many of them have children as well. And sometimes they schedule a session, and maybe the child wakes up, or they have to go finish their dinner right in the middle of the session, and they might have to come back, or they would have scheduled a time, but maybe their work shift changed and they are not able to fulfill that obligation and meet the deadline. So there is a challenge, because the mature student has a lot more responsibilities. But I would say then that the 24/7 really works, because when they get that free moment, or when they can find that niche in their time, they're able to use our facilities in order to help them. Whereas in a traditional setting, offices will be closed on campus. There'll be no help for them after work.
Gotcha. Understood. Understood. Yeah, I mean that's definitely interesting to hear, and I think that kind of ties into as we talk about the home life and some of the more responsibilities. I think you dive in and kind of touch into the I guess the cultural aspect, because it's a different framework that the adult learners are working in versus some of the more traditional students. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about some of the cultural aspects of what is an adult learner with not being as tech savvy supposedly, and then also in just having those responsibilities and having peers that may not be going through the same situations as them. What effect does that have on them, both academically and perhaps emotionally or psychologically? And I'll start with I guess Peggy on this one. I'd love to get your thoughts on that cultural aspect.
Culturally, the non-traditional or more mature student does tend to be more financially conservative. And so one thing that we see is they are not always able to attend a full-time status. So they may take one or two classes at a time. And then another thing is that they do want things to be important as far as going forward. They want things to be relevant. They really look for relevance. And so just the traditional way of teaching with wanting them to memorize facts, I teach some difficult science subjects, but they're for people going into the allied health fields. And so they need to be reminded that this is going to be how you're going to be taking care of someone, and then they care about it enough. But it is very difficult for them to split their time, and they are self-conscious about that age gap when they're sitting in class. So many times they really just need support in order to be successful. They need compassion, they need support, just like anyone else, really.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Like that big key is that with whatever it is that they're learning, the subject matter, that relevance is the key factor. Is that Tanisha? I was curious to know if that's something that you've seen, or not just seen, but has that changed over your time in tutoring and working with adult learners? Has it kind of stayed the same? Has it evolved? Could you talk a little bit more about, I guess, your experience with some of those adult learners, wanting that relevance in what they're learning?
Oh, yes, that is indeed true. I think one of the things that I've noticed with my students, they're following a particular pathway that is different from the traditional learner, in that most traditional learners would go from high school into college, whereas the adult learner, they go from high school perhaps to a job and then off to college. So there's not only the generational gap, but they think that there's a gap in whatever it is that they were learning. There's this gap, so they think that they've missed out. Going back usually means going back to get something that they were not able to achieve. So yes, there's this sense of wanting to be relevant when it comes to certain things, and they have this sense of achievement. I noticed that adult learners, even though they tend to have more time constraints, in the same way they tend to be more responsible. My my older students tend to be more responsible when it comes to their they submitting their assignments. When it comes to getting something, they will go over and over and over until they actually get it, whereas the ones coming directly from high school, they tend to sort of stretch the time a bit, whereas adult learners tend to always think about the time, their time. It's very important to them. The other thing that I've noticed is that most of the time they're not doing it only for themselves. They talk about their children, something that they want to achieve in order for their children to also see a person that they can look up to. So I think there are more motivational forces behind the adult learner than the traditional learner.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean that totally makes sense. I guess Tracy, is that something that you've seen as well, or have you experienced anything differently?
Yes, I would agree. That is what happens with the adult learner. I would add to that their mindset, because they are one, they're usually paying for their own degree, or they're funding it, whether it's by loan or so on. It costs them a lot more, and time as well. It costs them a lot more time because they have less flexible time, and they are more committed to the process. And I find as well that because of their life experience, even though the theories might be new to them, because they have this lot of life experience, they can relate to a lot of the subjects in the classroom. And if we can help them to understand that, don't see that you've been away from the classroom so long because as a disadvantage, see it as you're in the real world, you've been in the work world for a while, and now you come with valuable experiences. For me as an adult learner, that is what I found. My undergraduate degree, I was doing psychology, and it was the first time I was doing psychology, but I had lived in the real world. I had worked with NGOs, and I have seen these different personalities and understood these personality types already. I didn't know the names. I was not learning the names, but it was not unfamiliar information to me because I already had life experience.
Gotcha. And as a follow-up, because these adult learners have this work experience or more life experience, and they've seen how how things happen on a day-to-day basis and have more experience with that, then when they come into some of the sessions and are learning some of the subject matter, is there much more debate and more questioning because they have some type of experience to pull some of their arguments for when they are discussing some of the theories that are in this subject matter? Is that something that you've seen, Tracia, or they more in tune with the theory of it and kind of going along and just learning about that? Is there more pushback? Have you seen? Is that a pattern? Or?
I'm laughing because it is slightly different. I find that the younger people who are lesser experienced tend to be more the ones who will debate and question and challenge you than the more mature student. But what the mature student will bring to the table, they will bring real life world examples, and they can solidify what you're saying, and they can understand. Like even if I find like you can have a younger student who might be like seem more intellectual or quicker, but when it comes to deeper understanding and those sort of what's the word I'm looking for? But those analytical skills, I find that the older, mature student has them there and can bring real life experience into it. So it's more not of a debate, but adding to the conversation.
Interesting. And I'm curious, Peggy, is that something that you've seen as well in your experience in terms of comparison of the traditional students versus those adult learners?
Oh yes, I have to jump in here. This is a biology thing. So in class we talk about the frontal lobe is not working yet. And so with the older people, Britt, an 18-year-old knows they know everything. So,
Sure.
So they are more likely to argue. The older people are very, very involved, though, in bringing their life experiences in, especially if you have some who have already been working in the field. And that is so valuable for them to do some peer tutoring on certain things with the younger generation. But the older or more experienced students will have more practical experience. So when you're doing a learner-centered activity, then they're often going to step up and be leaders in that activity. And they may not be as quick to seek tutoring outside there, because that being unsure of themselves then comes into play. They really have to be encouraged. However, once they get started on it, they really take advantage of it and see the advantage of it.
Interesting. And I guess, speaking of that, on that topic of, seeking out whether it's tutoring or other tools in order to help out, that was, the next topic that I was hoping to jump into was, a discussion on what some of those methods or tools that the adult learners that they tend to use versus some of their traditional counterparts. So I can go ahead and start with Tanisha. I'd love to hear, what are some of the the ways or some of the methods or different tools that are utilized by those adult students, whether it's something that the traditional counterparts use or not. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that subject.
I think one of the best tools, I think an adult learner's best friend is the online platform, because it helps them with so many different aspects. For one, it helps them with time management. I think it was either Peggy or Tracy that mentioned the busy schedule and being able to access information, access a tutor 24/7. It's one of most of my adult learners, when they actually come into the session, they usually start by saying they wish they had known about an online platform like this for like a number of years. They wish they had known, because they would have taken advantage of it a long time ago. So one of the greatest things for adult learners is actually knowing that there's an online platform that they can access, something that they can get help with. The other thing is that it goes hand in hand with the online platform. I noticed that most of my students start out by saying that they doubt themselves, but based on the previous discussion, we were mentioning how they react to certain things, and if they debate about some of the theories or so on. I've noticed that when they love encouragement, once you start the session and they're doing things and they seem to be, oh, I remember this or I remember that. Once you've encouraged them, that saying, okay, you're on the right path, they tend to have a greater sense of self once you as a tutor show them how much they're progressing and how much they actually know. So the second session is usually much more, you see a much more self-assured person. They're usually much more, so the tools that you want to use is actually the tutor and the platform. Their achievement is those things. Having a good tutor and having a really good platform that they can access.
Gotcha. Cool. And I guess jumping over to Tracy now, in terms of having the tutor and having that platform available and online support, are there any additional tools that might be or tools that adult learners will use that perhaps the traditional counterparts don't use? Do they seem to be using the same tools now? I guess, could you talk a little bit about that comparison in what is being used by the traditional versus the adult learner, non-traditional students?
I will still say that the mature student will still prefer to use like physical things where they can write in their notebook. I smiled when I saw the picture, because they usually still like to be able to write in their notebook. They want to go to the physical library and be able to pull up a book or that they can find information in as well. On the platform itself, they're usually the first ones to want to know, how do I save this information? How do I keep it? How can I refer back to what we've done and stuff like that?
Gotcha. Save and refers. Yeah, so it sounds like the documentation aspect is something that they know that they're going to be referring back to and be able to have the ability to study it, perhaps at a later time, and that kind of touches on the time management aspect. Is that the same thing that you've seen, Peggy, or are there some different, some other major differences or other tools that adult students use that help them out?
I think the non-traditional or more experienced student is more likely to want to write things down. Even if when you're tutoring, they want to write down what's on the screen and you say, oh, you can do, a screenshot and then save it for later. But the writing is so important. It goes into your brain when you write it. So that actually gives them an advantage. And, you'll be giving notes sometimes in a face-to-face, and the younger students want to just take a picture with their phone. And I say, that's a smartphone. But the more experienced students then know that they need to write this information down. And that notebook is a good tool. It's old fashioned, but it's a good tool.
Yeah, no, I agree. I use one myself. Okay, cool, awesome. Well, yeah, I guess moving forward, I know we're coming up on about the 30-minute mark. What I wanted to do was actually move into the Q&A section. There were some questions that were asked, so let me go ahead and get to those now. The first one was, let's see. And I think we kind of touched on this question, but I'm interested in hearing from Tracia. Have you seen a trend where adult learners are more motivated than traditional students because they have more at stake? I think it was mentioned earlier by Tanisha in terms of the adult learners seem to have they seem to value time more. They talk about their children. There's a little bit of extra motivation because of those responsibilities. But I was curious to know if there was anything to add in terms of that motivation piece, Tracia, for the adult learners.
I just think we covered it all. Basically, that they were more motivated because of their time constraints, because of their family commitment, and they want to actually have this degree or a better profession, not just for themselves, but for their family, maybe earning more to benefit their family, like their children. And also the fact that they were paying, the ones that are paying, not their parents, they're paying out of their pocket or from the loan, so they have more to lose. So in that sense, and they feel sometimes that they're catching up. Maybe they would have wanted to do their degree when they're 20, but now they're 30 or 40, and they feel as if they're catching up, so they want to get it done.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And then also another question we received was, and this we kind of touched on, but the question was, do you find yourself helping adult learners with more than just academics? For example, that time management aspect, some of the study habits, or goal settings is. I guess the non-academic piece. Would you say that's discussed more with the traditional students or the non-traditional adult learners? And I guess we can direct that question at Peggy. Love to hear your thoughts.
I think contrary to that, I think that they are very motivated, and I think the primary support that might be different is because of the constraints on their time. Perhaps they have a sick child and can't come to class. There has been a tradition in education for adhering to some rigid schedule of turning work in. And I think that it's very important to allow late work, especially for older people. I don't like to penalize them. And so I think that is a help that I give. I don't just give it to them, I give it to everyone. But I think it's an important change. It is a shift in the style of teaching and expectations. But they have some students I have are in the same class with one of their children. And so there's a very competitive thing there, or they're really afraid to fail. One student just this semester told me, "This is my 5th time to attempt this. This is my last chance." Oh, this is such a heavy burden. She made an A.
Oh, that's good. Okay, cool. Yeah, and I can definitely understand it. I mean, I think the constraints on time is, certainly a pretty big aspect of that motivational factor. Was that the same thing that, and I guess I can jump over to Tanisha, and is this something that you've seen as well in terms of the the adult learners needing more or spending some more time on the non-academic side, or versus the traditional counterparts?
Based on my experience, I'm seeing I would say pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same for adult learners and the traditional learners, in that the traditional learners, they're usually, when it comes to time management, for example, their reason for being tardy is totally different from that of an adult learner. They usually complain about their coursework, they complain about their lecturers, they complain about those things, whereas an adult learner would apologize for not being able to submit assignment on time, or not being able to schedule within a reasonable time. they usually attribute that to something personal, like they had a meeting, or they had something to do with their family. It's usually something that they in themselves did not out of, whereas the traditional learner usually has really, I would say, it's something that they can easily manage, but they usually tend to have a totally different complaint. I would say it's balanced on both sides.
Okay. Yeah. And Tracy, is that something that you see as well in terms of the adult students, non-traditional, seem to have, if there is lateness, tardiness, it's personal issues versus the traditional students, where some of the more non-academic issues they face, if there is tardiness, is coursework or instructor or the other rules by the institution. Is that something that you hear about as well?
Yes, and one of my concerns with adult students about this is that, unlike the younger students who are always willing to tell you their problems and their excuses why they can't submit an assignment on time, the adult student would bend over backwards and go way beyond to get the assignment on time, even in times of crisis. And I guess from me as a counselor in education, and also as working in student affairs, letting students know that you can take time off, you can ask for an extension when you have family crises. I've had students, when I'm on Upswing, I had a student who was in the hospital with her husband, who got seriously rushed to the hospital, and she wanted to still get her assignment done. I had a student who had just had a baby a few weeks ago, and obviously was hardly getting any sleep at night, and she was still there trying to get her work done. I've had students when I was working on college campuses who were working and who had family crises and didn't know that you can actually ask for extension, you can actually take time off because you have an issue, and you don't need to burn yourself out. They usually see it as, I can't, I have to do this by this time, and come hell or high water, as they say, it must be done.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And is that something, as a follow-up question, is that something that over your time in working in this area, has that changed over time, or how would you say that the trend over time for some of these adult students in traditional, has it always been like that? Is this a recent development based on your experience?
It has always been like that, but also we are getting more and more mature students. Before, it was only a handful of persons who are like that, but now, you can find some, college campuses, you have 40% of the students are mature students who are coming in after work and stuff like that, who have other responsibilities. And many times they don't know the information that they should know in terms of how to navigate the college campus, what you can do to ask for extension if you have a crisis, if you have an illness, what you do if you have to take time off from a course. I remember there was a student, his aunt, who was very close to him, died, and he got that information when he was in this particular class. And every time he would go into that class, it would be like blank, because he remembered the time his aunt died. He didn't know, he finished college. He was incomplete because he didn't get his, he didn't complete that course that was crucial. It's some person I met, years after. And I said, but there are allowances on college campuses for these things where you can ask, maybe you could do another course similar to it, or you can ask for an extended period of time where you can do that course, and you don't have to fail or not get the exam done because you've had a crisis. And many times they don't know this information, and I find that hasn't changed. It's just that now there are more people who are experiencing that because we have more mature students.
Gotcha. Understood. Wow. Yeah, that's it's certainly interesting to hear, and I think acts as a good stopping point, as it really kind of ties into what we were saying in the beginning of just the importance of focusing on engaging these adult learners, and as there's becomes more and more of them, it's a matter of becoming, how do we engage to be able to help them persist and to be able to graduate. So I think that's a great stopping point. We'll go ahead and stop here. And I guess before we I guess before we stop, I wanted to thank the for joining us on this webinar. I really did enjoy the conversation, and I certainly hope that it's useful for some of our listeners. So with that, I'll go ahead and sign off and stop the presentation. But thanks everyone for joining, and look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.